This video needn't really take too much time, and I'm not trying to be an expert here on what detail changes Enfields had from year to year, because there's lots of them that I don't really know about, and I don't know what happened in what year in all cases, but I know enough to know an Indian bike when I see one and a British bike when I see one, and I know when I see an Indian bike for sale advertised as a British built one that it's clearly not. And straight away on this 350 Indian example here, the first obvious, blindingly, no questions, no argument sign that it's Indian is this great big bolt running through the frame above the gearbox here. If a bike's got that, it's not British. It wasn't built in Britain and disassembled and sent to India and rebuilt over there, or sent over from Britain to India and assembled it. This is an Indian bike, right, 100%. So if ever you see a bike offered for sale as a 1963 or 1965, seems to be quite popular years for some reason, British Royal Enfield that was sent to India and assembled there and then brought back to Britain and restored, it's just an Indian bike. Doesn't matter if it's got a black number plate on it or if it's got a Redditch factory frame number on it. It just means that that number will have been stamped on it, because if it's got this, it's Indian, right? And that's all there is to it. There's other subtle differences as well as the years go by, but basically Redditch, I think, finished making 350 bullets around 1961, although they carried on with a 350 bullet that was a long stroke version of the Crusader for a couple of years after that. But you will not get a 1965 Redditch 350. They just don't exist. And the 500s were built in Redditch, I believe, from 1953 till about 1960 or 61. Now, although it's in green lane spec and not entirely original, here's a 1955 500. The engine and frame are from 1955, although they're not, they didn't leave the factory together, they're only a couple of hundred numbers apart. And for 1955, your no questions, no arguments identification point is this lug for the swing arm here, and there's no bracket going around and up over the top of the gearbox at all on these frames. So if you see one of those, that is a 1954-55 Redditch bullet frame. They were used on 350s and 500s. The Indian frames are more like an earlier version of a Redditch frame, which I haven't actually got to hand here, but as you can see on this bike, the 350, and this bike, a 500 Indian bullet, you can see that you've just got a straight tube going up here, and then that great big bolt going through there. On the British frames that were similar to that, this tube came round, curved round, and was welded. There was no bolt through it. There may also be some Indian bikes that were built with those frames, which basically the only thing you can guarantee is if you see this big bolt going through, only the Indians had this. So you got that, it's Indian, and that's the end of it. Another thing, a lot of Indians, especially the more recent ones, don't have is a little oil pressure relief valve here, which all the Redditch engines had, although some early Indian ones had as well. But if you see this, it's Indian, it's not Redditch. If you look on the Redditch engine, let's see if you can see it, it's a bit dark there. Hopefully make that little, just looks like a bolt, but it's actually an oil pressure relief valve just below the rocker feed union. You got that, it's either very early Indian or Redditch. This engine doesn't have a bulge for the automatic advance and retard unit, and it also has a magneto on it, so that is a giveaway that that is entirely British. And really, I'm not trying to sort of show that this model year should have this and this model year should have that or whatever. As I've already said, I'm no expert, but sometimes it gets a bit tiresome seeing people trying to sell what are clearly Indian bikes as some sort of one-off special British machine that's been assembled in Britain, then dismantled and shipped over to India and used and restored and brought back to the UK, and all the history and all the documents, blah 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 blah, and it's clearly just an Indian bike that's worth about a quarter of what they're trying to get for it. So you can consider this video as a bit of a public service if you like. I'm not getting anything out of it, but it really gets to me when people try and pull the wool over other people's eyes with these Royal Enfields, because it's surprising how many people you get that think that this bike in front of us here is about 60 years old. It's not. It's probably about 20 years old, but it's an Indian one. It's a nice bike, but it's not worth thousands and thousands of pounds. And it wasn't built in Britain for the Indian Army and shipped over there in 1963 or anything else. It was built in India in the 1990s and shipped over to Britain. And that's all there is to it. So if you're offered something that's claimed to be a bit special, it doesn't matter what colour it is, whether it's in trials trim, road trim or anything else, if it's got that dirty great big bolt going through it there, it's an Indian one, and it's not worth whatever they're trying to get for it. So buyer beware, but look out for the big bolt. That's my advice.